Awful and inhumane are words used by New York State lawmakers this week to describe conditions at the Rikers Island jail complex. Plans are in the works to close the facility by 2027. It would ultimately be replaced with smaller jails in 4 of the city's boroughs. Earlier this week, Mayor Bill de Blasio unveiled an emergency relief plan to address immediate issues at the complex. For more, I'm joined by New York State Senator Jabari Brisport and New York State Assembly member Jessica González-Rojas. Both of them visited Rikers Island this week to get a first-hand look at the conditions. Assembly member González-Rojas, I'm going to start with you. What were you expecting to see, and how did that compare to what you actually saw at Rikers?
Well, this is the fourth facility that I've seen over the course of the 8 months that I've been in office. I've been to Rikers several months ago. But what I saw this time around was an absolute humanitarian crisis. Prisons and jails are awful places to begin with, but we saw garbage strewn all over the floor. We saw people piled up on each other. We were stepping over piles of urine. We saw dead cockroaches. We saw rotting food. It was awful, and it really was a humanitarian crisis. The place is in a state of emergency, and we need to act now. We must work to decarcerate. It is in the middle of a pandemic. We saw people that didn't have access to showers, didn't have access to food, didn't have access to PPE or clean clothes. So we need to take emergency steps to decarcerate and ensure that everyone is addressing this public health issue as it is a public health issue.
Senator Brisport, I want you to tell our viewers a little bit more about who's actually housed at Rikers and what prompted you to make this visit.
So a lot of the people at Rikers are actually being held in pre-trial detention. They haven't even had a trial, haven't even been convicted of anything. And that's what's most distressing, because you have people in there like the humanitarian crisis that the Assemblywoman said, literally stepping over piles of trash and dead cockroaches, some of whom have been held in cages where they've expected to be there for a few hours. They're there for a few days, and they've been given a bag to urinate and defecate in because there is no toilet in the room with them. And they do not know when they're going to get out or when they'll even be able to see a trial or a lawyer. We spoke with lawyers who are having trouble even seeing their clients.
Senator Brisport, I just want to underscore something that you said. You actually said that the people who are there are pre-trial, so that means that in most cases not convicted of a crime, and they're given bags to defecate in.
Yes, in one of the intake facilities, it's so overcrowded that they've been staying in rooms without bathrooms that are just supposed to, that there's usually would be there in it for a few hours. Some of them have been in there for days, and they've been given bags to urinate and defecate in.
Assemblymember González-Rojas, Rikers Island has been plagued for years with issues. Tell us more about how the coronavirus pandemic has furthered these problems, and how, given what we've just heard from Senator Brisport, how are people dealing there?
I want to confirm what Senator Brisport just said. I saw the same thing and the same conditions in the intake unit. You know, jails and prisons are naturally more prone to virus and disease spreading because there's no space for social distancing. As I mentioned earlier, people had told me they had been given they're wearing the same mask that they had been given 5 days ago. There wasn't access to showers. They were not wearing clean clothes. It's in a complete state of disarray. And in the height of the pandemic last year, the mayor used a law that's called 6A under the correction law, and he was able to release 1,500 people from the population. We are going to see another death on our hands if we don't take drastic action right now. So we're calling on the mayor to take action as well. And we're also calling on the governor to sign the Less is More Act, which would release folks who are just simply there on parole violations. And to add to what the senator said, the kind of folks that I got to meet had just, missed a curfew under parole and had been there for months. months just for missing a curfew. So these are folks that do not, no one deserves to be in these conditions, but certainly we can reduce the population immediately. And it is a public health strategy to address the spread of COVID, particularly during this time where we have this really contagious Delta variant. And we could see this spread throughout the facilities, not just with folks who are behind bars, but those staff and health workers as well.
Senator Brisport, the conditions that the two of you are describing are abhorrent and, as you have said, inhumane. It's tough to think of people and people who haven't, as you said, in many cases, even been convicted of crimes or as the Assemblywoman has just said, their offense in that case was missing a curfew on a parole violation, that are being held in such circumstances. And our viewers are going to want to know why. Obviously, one of the thoughts is about understaffing, and there are reports that Rikers Island is severely understaffed. New York City's Correction Officers Union says that they need more people hired there, but you say that that's not at the root of the problem, staffing. What is behind the deterioration at Rikers?
The understaffing was a word and a phrase that was said to us multiple times while we were there. And I am convinced that the problem is not that there are too few staff, but there are too many people locked up in the cages at Rikers. That this is not an understaffing problem, but a mass incarceration problem. We are sending too many people into that place. And the flow there is, you cannot deal with it. So in addition to the two things that the Assemblywoman said, the mayor with the 6A release program and the governor needing to sign less is more into legislation, there also needs to be attention paid to our DAs around New York City who are still asking for cash bail and causing people to be locked up for pretrial.
Certainly, we know that that's a problem that disproportionately hurts the poor, people who cannot afford to post bail, then are locked up in situations like this. Senator Brisport, I want to follow up with you about, because you're talking about legislative solutions. As I mentioned earlier, this week, Mayor Bill de Blasio unveiled a new plan to try and address the ongoing situation at Rikers. Do you think that this is a step in the right direction? Obviously, it does not seem that you think that this goes far enough.
I do not think it goes far enough. A lot of the solutions were, I saw things such as getting fancier locks on the doors, when I think that if we had fewer people in there to begin with, you wouldn't need to have a person locked up there to even worry about a fancier lock. And just to reiterate something that the Assemblywoman said, the 6A release program, the mayor could work on this to start letting people out immediately under supervised release. And it's a program that was shown to work previously.
Assemblymember González-Rojas, what it seems like the two of you are talking about is really criminal justice reform at a much greater level. And you and other lawmakers have called on Governor Kathy Hochul to pass what's known as the Less is More Act. How exactly would it address what's happening at Rikers?
The Less is More Act would address the overpopulation in Rikers by reducing and releasing those who are there on minor technical parole violations. Again, the person who missed curfew, the person who might have been late to meet with their parole officers. These are very minor infractions that I think all of us New Yorkers can understand what it means like to be held by the train or delayed by traffic. So that's a solution that both the state assembly and the state senate pass by the end of the session. So we're literally just waiting for this signature. And not only do we need her to sign it, but we need her to enact it immediately, because if otherwise it would go into effect March 2022, and we are in the state of emergency right now. The one thing I also want to share is that the despair that I saw in the faces and in the stories of every single person who was locked in those cages was heart-wrenching. And I witnessed a suicide attempt right before my eyes. And the desperation that people are experiencing, as the senator mentioned, they just don't know when they're going to get before a court. They don't know when they're going to talk to a loved one. They don't know when the bail is going to get posted. So because of both the absenteeism and the overcrowdedness, we're just seeing a climate that is in which we're going to see another death on our hand. So there's been 10 deaths already, and we need to solve this issue immediately.
Suicide attempts, bags to defecate in. This is mind-boggling. State Senator Jabari, Brisport, Assembly Member Jessica González-Rojas, thank you both for sharing what you've seen with all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.